Wedding Crashers is one of the most beloved comedies of all time, but behind the scenes it had one of the most bizarre journeys of any movie ever. The script was being completely rewritten as they were filming, the studio tried to trash the film before it was released, and the film was so controversial that the United States Congress even passed a law to fight the film. And when you see how all of this went down, it becomes almost impossible to believe it ended up becoming the classic it became. The craziness began before the cameras even started rolling, because the original version of Wedding Crashers was not the same movie you saw. Before writing We're the Millers, Steve Faber and Bob Fisher wrote the original Wedding Crashers screenplay. The story was inspired by Faber's real-life experience crashing events.
I used to crash lobbyist events in Washington, D.C. to get food and cutlery and rip it off.
Given this is one of my favorite movies of all time, and literally the comedy that made me fall in love with comedies, I had to read the screenplay for myself. But when I gave it a read, I noticed something seriously off about it. To say the script is unrecognizable from the film would be a real understatement. Like, I got 10 pages into the screenplay and my thought was, wow, I guess there were two different movies titled Wedding Crashers, and not, wow, they made a lot of changes to the screenplay. So I actually Googled who wrote Wedding Crashers, and when I saw it was Faber and Fisher, I only grew more confused. Like, we're talking I didn't recognize a single line of dialogue, the scenes took place in unfamiliar settings, and the characters themselves were entirely different from what we saw on screen. It was just a whole different movie. So I had to know how this was even possible, and it turns out there were several things going on behind the scenes. For starters, the screenplay was rewritten from the ground up. It started with an uncredited rewrite by Scott Moore and John Lucas, who would later go on to write The Hangover. But it didn't stop there, because afterwards the cast and crew made complete overhauls to the script, oftentimes at the very last second, which we'll get more into in a bit. Wedding Crashers wasn't being polished like most scripts are at this point, it was being fundamentally rebuilt. It was one of the most bizarre productions where everything seemed to come together at the last second, yet everything also seemed to work out. It was around this time that the man who would completely reshape everything about the movie was brought on, director David Dobkin. At this point, he was viewed as an unproven director, having only directed Clay Pigeons and Shanghai Knights. He had met Vince Vaughn when he starred in Clay Pigeons and Owen Wilson through Shanghai Knights. But when he saw Owen and Vince together at the premiere for Shanghai Knights, something immediately clicked for him, and none of their lives would ever be the same.
I invited Vince to the Shanghai Knights premiere. And in the background, I saw Owen talking to his mother, and I looked at them, and I had them both like stacked up. And I had an Abbott and Costello went in my head. Went to my agent that night and I said, I'd like to find something with Vince and Owen. And it was Wedding Crashers.
This moment wouldn't just change the movie, but it would forever change all three of their careers. It was really the perfect timing, as Vince and Owen were quickly rising up the star ladder, but weren't quite the A-listers they'd become. And the same can be said for Dobkin as a director. The two had previously been in Zoolander, but didn't share any scenes, and did Starsky and Hutch a year prior to Wedding Crashers, but this would be the first time they'd co-star together and show the world the chemistry they were capable of. As much as Vince and Owen dominated the movie, this cast was absolutely loaded with talent and had some extraordinary casting stories. So much so that each casting story seemed to find a way to top the one before it. But the craziest part of all of this is that they kept on landing the best possible actors at the absolute last second. Jane Seymour almost didn't audition at all because she was afraid of how the movie would impact her image.
And I read it and I went, oh my God, this is the funniest thing I've ever read, and especially that scene. Yeah. But what a shame. I've just been doing Dr. Quinn. All my fan base, they'll go nuts. Oh, it gets even funnier the second time. What a shame. I wish I could. Third time I went, what the heck? I have to.
I didn't know she was British, by the way. She does a really great American accent, but she ultimately auditioned, and she shared quite the story of that experience.
So David Dobkin calls and says, look, do you think if you come back, you could up the sexuality a bit? Yes, if I'm not playing opposite to another woman my own age who's a casting director, it just would help. So they brought in this really hot. So we rehearse, and we go out and we do it, and kill it, obviously, and I get the role.
Isla Fisher, who cemented herself as the original Stage 5 Klinger, was actually considering giving up acting altogether before landing the role of Gloria, which she credits to her husband at the time, Sacha Baron Cohen, aka Borat.
I have to credit my husband for Wedding Crashers because it was time to choose a new vocation when he said, why are you going for these dramatic roles? You should be going for comedy roles. You're so funny. And Wedding Crashers was the first one I went for.
I actually did know that she's Australian, but it's still wild to me how you can talk one way your whole life, and then completely change your accent for an entire movie. Rachel McAdams' story was truly unique because the studio was losing its patience and had already scheduled a meeting to cast the role of Claire before she even auditioned. She beat out Shannon Elizabeth, best known for her role as Nadia in American Pie, and also newly formed OnlyFans model, among several other talented actresses.
And then McAdams, I almost hired in the room as well because I could not find anyone to play that role. And she was literally the last person that came in at 11. Discovered this girl, Rachel McAdams, and they're like, "We have her in this movie coming out called The Notebook. Like, you could have." I'm like, "Tell me about her." Like, this is 200 people later.
Think about it. If McAdams hadn't had that last-second audition, one of the most iconic rom-com pairings of the 2000s never would have happened. Then there was Bradley Cooper, who we all absolutely hate in the movie, but killed it in the actual role. His casting story was unique as well, as to this day, he's the only actor that David Dobkin has ever cast in the room immediately following his audition.
Bradley Cooper in the film, the perfect asshole in the film.
He just by the way, he's the only actor I ever hired in the room of an audition. He was so good, and I have a rule against doing that. And I was just like, all right, well, that's the guy. I can't even find anybody close to that. Like, okay, man, I'll see you at rehearsals. And he was like, really?
But the wildest casting story of them all would have completely changed the movie if it had been cast differently. Will Ferrell was almost not even in the movie. They had to wait until the night before he came to set to even get confirmation that he'd be in the film. And the actor who was going to replace him if he couldn't make it was Nicolas Cage. I can't even imagine that.
So we got, we were trying to get Will. We didn't get Will till midnight the night before he was shooting. It was one day.
Oh, wow.
We were having a very hard time confirming him, and we had Nick Cage as a backup.
And if that swap had happened, arguably the most iconic cameo of the 2000s turns into something very different. This is just how thin the margins were between getting a good comedy and one of the greatest of all time. At every point of the process, Wedding Crashers was one decision away from being a completely different movie. The studio even wanted Burt Reynolds instead of Christopher Walken, but they allowed David Dobkin to go with this pick. And thankfully so, because I can't imagine anyone else pulling it off the way Walken did. By the time filming finally began, Wedding Crashers had already been rewritten, underwent a bizarre casting process, and had been transformed into a completely different movie. Yet somehow the craziest part of the story hadn't even happened yet. What happened during the actual filming of Wedding Crashers is really what led to this movie becoming the classic that it did. Because it operated much less like a traditional movie set, and more like a comedy Hall of Fame factory. Most studio comedies nowadays feel corporate and manufactured to death, with all the authenticity and spontaneity stripped completely. From green screens to filming on sound stages instead of actual locations, the artistic side of filmmaking feels like an endangered species. But Wedding Crashers was the complete opposite. Dobkin wanted the movie to feel as real, genuine, and alive as possible, and it's no clearer than when they started filming the wedding montage. Instead of faking it on a soundstage, they literally created new weddings every day for a week. And they were so authentic that it genuinely felt like a new wedding ceremony for the cast and crew every day. Dobkin was so committed to the realism of the movie that he even hired a wedding coordinator to make sure the weddings looked real.
I wanted a real wedding coordinator. I wanted someone that could make sure, details.
I give them what is real, and they choose what looks best for the camera.
In a movie, you want to be as authentic as you can.
And then here I am today.
If that wasn't enough, he even brought on a magic and balloon specialist for the scene where Vince's character makes animal and bike balloons.
I worked with them on how to make some of the basic animals and how to twist them.
I'm happy to give you a bicycle if you calm down. I don't want to have to give you medication. Those really long balloons are really hard to even blow up. It's hard to really even get them started.
But while all of this was going on, the script wasn't even remotely close to being locked. Dobkin, along with the cast, rewrote the script during production, oftentimes after a long day of filming.
And this is why I've probably never been more tired than when I finished this movie, is a lot of it was like we would meet on weekends and the night before and go over the scene and try to brainstorm.
Some of it's crazy. I look back at it and there was literally major pivotal scenes.
I can definitely say that their level of fatigue played a heavy factor in how funny the movie actually was, because all of my favorite personal material has come when I've been quite tired. So much so that I intentionally plan to ruin my sleep schedule before I do the final dialogue pass on my next feature. But that wasn't even the end of it, because once the camera started rolling, the cast often rewrote the movie in real time. Improv absolutely dominated this film.
He was like stripping down and dancing, and I mean, everybody loves it. The extras go crazy, go wild.
Did you have fun improvising as well? I heard there was a lot in that movie.
No, we had a blast. They're really, really talented guys. I mean, they're so fun to work with. Everything was always new and exciting and different. It was cool.
And I had a great time. It was amazing. The guys were so funny and so fresh, and you never knew what they were going to say from one take to the next.
You love to eat, you love to celebrate, you love to dance. So I think it's like these guys really like what it represents.
This was really a massive risk, as all this freedom easily could have blown up in their faces. When not managed perfectly, a constantly changing script and rewriting the dialogue in real time is a recipe for disaster. And that's what makes all of this so special. All the chaos that normally kills a comedy somehow became the exact reason why this one worked. They improvised so much that you could have stitched together all of the alternate takes of the film and wound up with a completely different movie. Each take had the potential to completely ruin the scene, or become a scene that's still being quoted today. Vince was clearly the king of improv in Wedding Crashers.
I don't like the feeling. You're sitting there, you're wondering, do I have food on my face? Am I eating? Am I talking too much? Are they talking enough? Am I interested? I'm not really interested. Should I play like I'm interested, but I'm not that interested? But I think she might be interested, but do I want to be interested? But now she's not interested.
His performance was so strong that Bradley Cooper said watching him in action changed him forever. And I and every other fan of The Hangover are eternally grateful. You really feel it when you watch the movie. Vince's cadence sets the rhythm for the entire film. But the improv wasn't just limited to Vince. He fed several lines to the grandma during the dinner sequence.
He was like across the table, he's like, say this on this one. And she was just looking at me. I'm like, yeah, say what he's, he was feeding her really funny lines.
I don't eat meat or fish.
He's a homo.
Jane Seymour even improvised during her most memorable line in the movie.
Kitty cat.
You have to do the little
We couldn't show the clip, by the way.
You have to go, kitty cat. That bit was not scripted, by the way.
You ad-libbed that? You had ad-lib.
Sure, I don't
Call me cat.
Okay, cat.
Call me kitty cat.
And is it just me, or is she still, really hot at the age of 75? This all really comes from Dobkin lacking any ego whatsoever as a director. In sports, they have a term, players coach, to describe coaches who are known to be there for their players and ones that the athletes love to play for. Well, I'm not sure if this is an actual term or not, but Dobkin is very much an actor's director, and that quality of him is no doubt what allowed for all the cast rewrites and improv on set. Without that level of trust from the director, at least half of the moments that made this movie so legendary never make it to the final movie. Larry Joe Campbell, who played the role of the best man in the movie, even shared his positive experience and Dobkin's willingness to listen to actors when I interviewed him last year.
I got some new sides, and Benjamin, it went from what you see in the film down to, thank you. Can we please talk to David? Can I please do what I auditioned? And God bless him, he let me.
So it should come as no surprise that the cast and crew had the time of their lives filming this movie.
Owen and Vince are just hysterical with the repartee, both on camera and off camera.
It was so fun and so outrageous and so figurative and, it was audacious.
Like, you love the fact that in this moment people are celebrating the possibility that you could be with someone. If only for that moment you believe that.
Wedding Crashers was a unicorn of a movie. They were firing on all cylinders with every variable of production. They had the all-star cast, the collaborative director, an ever-evolving script, and an environment on set where the funniest joke always won. It felt so much less like a corporate studio film, and so much more like a passion project indie film with a major studio budget. At the end of production, everyone involved knew just how special the film actually was going to be. Yet the studio had other plans and nearly ruined everything, because all of that fun would have been for nothing in the eyes of the studio if the film didn't make a profit. And there were serious concerns that the movie was going to flop. Despite being released in 2005, it kind of felt like 2025, with the kinds of concerns that New Line Cinema had about the marketing of this film. They thought the movie would come off as sexist, that the leads played by Vince and Owen were predators, and that the movie would be near impossible to sell, which is pretty wild to think about when you consider how tame this movie actually was, when you compare it to the other comedies around the same time, such as American Pie, Road Trip, and Euro Trip. Though Dobkin was ultimately able to convince them that the movie wasn't sexist, nor was it predatory.
And he goes, how are we selling this? These guys are predators. And I said, but it's not going to come off that way.
It's the atmosphere.
And they make the weddings better. And it's from their positive energy that the girls are attracted.
But the most ironic part of all of this is that when the movie was released, women made up a greater share of the theatrical audience than men, according to Dobkin.
60% of that audience was women.
It was really just a bunch of men white knighting on behalf of women. It kind of reminds me of my Gen Z React videos when a straight person gets offended on behalf of gay people, or when a white person says you can't tell a black joke anymore. But this wasn't even the biggest fight that Dobkin had with the studio, because New Line also wanted to fundamentally change everything about the movie before it went to theaters. They feared that this movie simply didn't have the theatrical audience it needed if it were to be rated R, and instead thought it would be better suited for families. Nothing like a movie about two guys who are always drunk and sleeping with new women for family movie night. So New Line had the plan of heavily censoring the movie in the editing room and releasing it with a PG-13 rating. They took it so far as to offer Dobkin millions of dollars to change its rating.
They offered me more money than they paid me on the movie to make it PG-13.
Wow.
It was really hard because I didn't have money then. So I should really just say yes. Like, who cares? I didn't want to touch it, you know? I didn't want to touch it.
Put bluntly, Dobkin was still viewed as an unproven director, and there was more than just millions of dollars riding on this decision. If he stuck with the R rating and the movie flopped, he would have faced all of the blame, and it likely would have been enough to end his career as he knew it as a director. However, he stuck to his guns and let his vision play out, releasing the movie with an R rating, much to the chagrin of the studio. Dobkin didn't just bet the movie on that decision, he risked his entire future in the industry on that decision. Think about how insane that is. Dobkin, who was not yet rich or viewed as a big-time filmmaker, risked everything because he believed in the movie so much. Most directors in the same spot probably see the dollar signs, shrug their shoulders, and say they were lucky enough to have been a part of this production, and ride off into the sunset several $1 million richer. But this decision really saved the movie. There was another comedy that faced the same exact dilemma nearly a decade later, but they actually did choose to go with the PG-13 rating. The movie was The Internship, and it's quite the coincidence, because this movie too starred Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson. The Internship, however, flopped at the box office, and with critics and audiences. Yet when I recently rewatched the unrated version, it was infinitely funnier than the PG-13 version. They cut out almost all of the best jokes, and even a key plot point, just to salvage its PG-13 rating. Thankfully, Wedding Crashers didn't go the same route, and I really wish Internship director Sean Levy would have consulted David Dobkin and avoided this mistake. By the way, if you want to see my R-rated comedy directorial debut, you could catch it on Tubi for free. But despite winning the creative battle, Dobkin was convinced that he just tanked the movie financially. Even though he knew he made the best artistic decision, he didn't expect Wedding Crashers to perform well at all at the box office.
We really didn't know what was going to happen, and we just thought we were going to get creamed.
But then something funny happened. The movie opened better than expected, and the momentum didn't slow.
Saturday was bigger than Friday. Sunday was bigger than Saturday. It was a total fluke. You know, by the end of the weekend, we had kind of made history, and then it kept on running.
Wedding Crashers didn't just have insane legs at the box office. It shattered expectations and even broke records. It became the first R-rated comedy to ever cross $200 million at the domestic box office, which this didn't just prove New Line wrong, but it also proved that audiences were craving this exact kind of movie. This isn't just the kind of result that makes the studio a lot richer, it's what changes the kinds of movies that get greenlit next. It did nearly $300 million altogether at the box office, and roughly another $150 million with its DVD sales, turning it into one of the most profitable comedies of the decade. Not bad for a movie that New Line thought was unmarketable and would be doomed if it didn't go for a PG-13 rating. It was also the extremely rare case of an R-rated comedy that performed well with both critics and audiences. So it turns out when you actually make a great comedy movie and stick to your creative principles, that the movies tend to do really well. Funny how that works. What makes this all so satisfying is that everyone believed in the movie, and it was a real team effort. The actors trusted their instincts and each other. Dobkin believed in them, and he also trusted the audience enough not to give in to the demands to water it all down. In an era where studios constantly micromanage comedies to death, it's refreshing to see a time where this didn't happen. It looked like Wedding Crashers had completely beaten the system. Dobkin fought the studio and was proven to be right. Everyone seemed to love the movie, and yet the strangest part of the story still hadn't happened yet. because after its release, there was a never-ending run of chaos. It all started with the United States government getting involved. Congress was not happy at all with the movie, and I guess Senator John McCain's cameo wasn't enough to stop the tension. To help market the movie, inspired by a scene, the official Wedding Crashers website offered free printable Purple Hearts to help pick up chicks at weddings. But Congress got so offended, they introduced a bill directly in response to this, titled the Stolen Valor Act, which would make it illegal to falsely represent yourself as military personnel. The producers ultimately pulled the printable Purple Hearts from the website, but the law still passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law, which meant a throwaway marketing gag for a comedy movie ended up leading to a federal law. But what they don't tell you is that this law ended up making it all the way to the Supreme Court, where it was ultimately struck down for being unconstitutional. I mean, what the hell? All of this over a joke? And I guarantee that no one actually printed out a fake Purple Heart and thought it would help them sleep with a woman. I've seen plenty of people get offended over a harmless joke, but I don't think I've ever seen it inspire federal law and go all the way to the Supreme Court. But the legacy of Wedding Crashers didn't stop there, as it officially launched Vince and Owen into A-list status, gave Jane Seymour and Isla Fisher new comedic opportunities, and no doubt helped Bradley Cooper land the career-defining role as Phil in The Hangover. It was also nice to see David Dobkin get the respect he deserved, landing the movie The Change-Up, which made me laugh so hard the first time I watched it that one of my neighbors literally changed their Wi-Fi name to "Who the f*** is laughing so loud?" Like, that seriously happened. It was that funny. He would also direct the movie The Judge, starring Robert Downey Jr., Billy Bob Thornton, and Robert Duvall, rest in peace, for one of the most underrated dramedies I've ever seen. The movie also apparently led to an NBC TV show titled The Real Life Wedding Crashers, which was produced by Ashton Kutcher. Dobkin said it was awful and not worth watching, and I'm just going to take his word for it. Probably the single most ironic thing to happen after the movie's release is that the screenplay was awarded number 59 on the WGA's list of funniest screenplays of all time. But to be clear, this is ironic because it was the original screenplay written by Faber and Fisher that was awarded this distinction, not the movie that was actually made. Now imagine if they got their hands on the final version that was rewritten by Scott Moore, John Lucas, David Dobkin, and the entire cast of the movie. If the original version was number 59, then I think the final version inevitably would have been number 1. Wedding Crashers didn't just become a hit, it became a generation-defining comedy, which is exactly why as Wedding Crashers turns 21 and is finally legally allowed to drink, people are still asking for a sequel. For years, Dobkin shut them down, so much so that he wouldn't even take phone calls on the matter. But who would want to see these two guys sharing the big screen one more time?
Well, Dad kind of putters around the house. Aunt Liz sends her best. She couldn't make it. She's dead.
She sends her best from the grave. We've become extremely spiritual ever since she passed.
I see.
He said recently that Wedding Crashers 2 is actually now in early talks, and that he finally has a plan for an original script, and not just a rehashing of the original movie.
Wedding Crashers 2?
We were prepping it, scouted for it. We have an incredible story in very distant discussions about it.
If Wedding Crashers is one of your favorites, then I'm sure The Hangover's up there for you too. Believe it or not, The Hangover actually had a journey that was way more insane than Wedding Crashers. The studio didn't want any of the actors that were cast, and the movie was almost never made. I take you on this crazy journey here.